Hey, good morning. It's June. Happy Pride Month. There are so many things going on today that you really should be dropping what you're doing and get out there and do them right now. The Pride Parade is going on right now, right out of the State Fairgrounds. Good morning and welcome to that Saturday show brought to you by the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. And there's so many things happening at the Peace and Justice Center right now. I was in 2 meetings yesterday. There's interns running all over the place. There's so much going on. It's a little mind-boggling, but I'll try to spell out what's going on right now. So like I said, our young interns have been in there. They've been working on our website that's been down for about a month. They're doing an incredible job. It's going to be an excellent state-of-the-art website. So we're looking forward to that. And for our members and our new members and people that want to donate to the Peace Center, you can go straight to that brand new website, and we've got everything set up for you, and you'll find out everything you need to know about the Peace Center and becoming a member and how to donate. If you're watching right now, drop whatever you're doing and get out to the Pride Parade. It's going on right now. Get out on Central from Girard to Louisiana and check out the parade. Right after that, there's a family pride fest at Morningside Park on Zuni that goes from 11:30 to 2:30. The Guns to Garden buyback program starts at 11 a.m. at the La Mesa Presbyterian Church at 7401 Copper Northeast. We have a little segment in the show about the awareness thing that happened last week. And you'll see that happened last week at the La Mesa Church. But the gun buyback, if you're watching the show and you can still get down there, and you want to turn in your guns and AR-15s and shotguns, whatever you want to do, they can go down there. They can saw them up, they can melt them down, and they turn them into hoes and rakes and shovels or plowshares, swords into plowshares, whatever you want to call it. There is a gun control march going on right after our program ends at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. But you lucky people on YouTube can play it back and watch whenever you want. And that is the March for Our Lives gun control rally that starts at 11 o'clock right after the show at Civic Plaza. And don't forget Connie Knutson's first annual Race Amity Festival, sponsored by the Peace Center, and that's way out at Mariposa Park and Taylor Ranch. That's 4700 Kachina Street Northwest off Montano. If you have questions, you can call Connie at 505-985-9171. The Guild Theater, which is a member of the Peace Center, is showing The Wobblies, which is the story of the International Workers Union in the 30s and all that. They fought for unions, fought for our 5-day work week, fought for paid vacations, fought for everything that we take for granted right now, and a number of people died. It's a very interesting movie. It's going on tonight, Sunday, and Monday night at the Guild Theater. Our main guests tonight are Janene, Yazzie, and Jolene Holgate. They're on the show to discuss missing and murdered Indigenous persons in New Mexico and the United States, and also sustainable living for Indigenous persons. So we have music by Tully Alford, a couple of songs coming up, and don't forget the People's Juneteenth celebration at Roosevelt Park on the 18th and 19th, and Nicole Rogers and the City's Juneteenth celebration is on those same dates. That's at Civic Plaza with a bunch of music and speakers. And that's about all for the announcements. Please, with everything going on, with all the stalemate in Washington and all this stuff, I voted in the primary probably just to get in practice for the November 7th election. And it's so important to get out en masse and change the complexion of Congress and bust the filibuster so we can actually do things and create better services for everybody in this country. In the meantime, Put your guns down, stop the hate, stop the racism, stop the violence, spread love, enjoy pride, and let's do a little fun stuff. I think we only have a few goofy photos this week, but let's check them out. Our first one is pretty self-explanatory. Elephants, please stay in your car. Grammar is very important. And next goofy video. This is actually a mural downtown. It's pretty close to Studio 519. And somebody was smart enough to use an air vent as a propeller. And it's a great little mural. Our next funny video is, well, you know, you need to stop your cars. You need to watch out, look both ways, because Sasquatch could be crossing. In other locales, he's Yeti and Bigfoot. And well, this is awkward, especially to those flat earthers. You know, I saw a picture on the internet of the Concorde way back when. It was flying so high it broke the speed of sound twice, and it flies so high that you can actually see the curvature of the Earth. So you know, that is pretty awkward. So if we have one more, this is the first one I downloaded. Red squirrels drive slowly. Of course they do. Their feet can barely touch the pedals. Cut them some slack. Well, that was a little bit silly, but on a more serious note, on a very serious note, I have two special guests in the studio tonight. I have Janene, Yazzie, and Jolene Holgate. They are involved. They're involved in many things on the reservation and with Indigenous persons, but they're here basically to talk about the subject of murdered and missing Indigenous persons in New Mexico and in the United States. Here's Janene, and there's Jolene. Janene is the Southwest Regional Director for the NDN Collective and is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. She has over 14 years of experience as a community organizer and a human rights advocate. She works on the intersections of climate change, water security, food security, energy development, and nation building in Indigenous communities in the U.S. and Latin America. And Jolene is is a Navajo woman intent on creating social change in Indigenous communities. She works as the Training and Education Director for the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native American Women. She works with Indigenous communities with hope to address challenges and develop pathways towards solutions to protect women and children. And for nearly 6 years, Jolene has worked with elected Navajo leadership, engaging in policy advocacy to address areas of human trafficking, sexual and domestic violence, cyberbullying, and protecting Navajo children. So you guys can tell me more about your bios, but I do want to thank you ladies both for being on the show. Janene, if you'd like to expand on your bio and address some of what we're talking about, go right ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom, for having us on your show. And for bringing more visibility to such an important issue. You know, the reason why we end up doing a lot of this work is because we grow up in communities that are heavily impacted and experiencing firsthand a lot of the repercussions of just the legacy of systemic violence and injustices that exist in this country. And so, you know, a lot of the work that I do, it sounds like a lot, you know, ranging from everything from like protecting Indigenous people's rights and promoting and building and nurturing sustainable development rooted in our traditional ecological knowledge and knowledge systems, to doing a lot of the frontline work, which is addressing some of the real challenges and epidemics of violence that our communities are facing both on and off reservations, because that's encompasses, it makes up the whole of our reality. And so yeah, I look forward to talking more about kind of what that means in a New Mexico context. And the reason why we do this work is because when we look at systemic violence or systemic injustices that affect all peoples, when you break down the history of those systems and those structures, it's been Indigenous peoples that have been on the forefront of experiencing the development of those structures, systems, processes that have become so embedded in our American culture. And so we work for our liberation because we hold the historic memory of what used to be prior to these systems and structures really embedding themselves in our communities and in our homelands. And because we know that those solutions will benefit all peoples.
Great. We have a lot of time to talk about this. Jolene, would you like to introduce yourself further?
Yeah. So my experience with community work actually started at a systems level. I had worked for the Navajo Nation for several years in the area of policy, and I think something that was really apparent and that I recognized is that the solutions actually come from our communities. And although, elected leadership and governments are trying to make those systemic changes, we understand that that's not where the solutions are. So transitioning to grassroots work, I think, it's just so full. It's so amazing. And I think that's what really inspired me to start really looking at solution-based pathways for violence within our communities. And just looking at ways that they all intersect and how not only are they affecting communities, but also, how are we understanding those root issues of violence. Things that aren't just surface level, like alcoholism or drug dependency. It's so much deeper than that. So we're starting these hard conversations to really think about what are those intersections of missing and murdered, the missing and murdered crisis. It has a lot to do with like domestic violence, sexual violence, trafficking, all those pieces. And just have been very inspired by community folks that have carried this work for so many years before I was born, for hundreds of years. So definitely it's rooted in love, it's rooted in community, and it's rooted in our work towards liberation. So,
well, you'd think that people in New Mexico were aware of these situations and a lot of the problems that goes on, but a lot of times we're in our own silos or in our own groupings, and we remain blissfully ignorant of these things. From an activist point of view, I'd say it was probably during the occupied time, where Occupy split into Occupy and Unoccupy here, and the unoccupied people stressed a lot about women's rights, feminism, indigenous rights, colonialism, things like that. So the activist community was aware. I know a lot of people that have done work in Central America and international work and stuff like that, but I don't think the activist community was really aware until a lot of people started to invite us to different seminars and kind of hit us over the head about, the colonialism, the violent history of white takeover of Native Americans in North America. The mistreatment, the boarding schools, people being put out on reservations, left alone to their own devices, whatever sovereignty means. You'd see things about different development programs, maybe water programs, basketball teams on different reservations. But it wasn't until, we really got environmentally aware of what was going on in the state. And like on other programs that we've had here, we've had the downwinders, and they were saying, everybody in New Mexico, in Arizona, in Utah, on the reservations, had the nuclear fallout. There's been development for plutonium and uranium on reservations. There's holding pools. There's very, very dangerous and deadly things that have happened to people on the reservation environmentally. And I would say for looking at, when we're looking from Albuquerque out on the situation, I've been involved in some things, but it wasn't until I got on to the Southwest Community Policing Council that I saw exactly what was going on in the International District, how many Native Americans comprised the homeless population, the different problems they were having with drug and alcohol. I talked to this guy a while ago, maybe 7 years ago, that came down from Washington, and he said he was the leader of the of the Native American Health Services, and he said something like, Albuquerque, New Mexico has the largest diversity of tribes in the nation, but probably the worst health care. And another group that we had on here just recently was the Duda Say No to the Blue Helium fracking, and I know there's other frackings that have been infringed on sacred lands in the Navajo Nation. And like we've been talking about, what's in the news every day now, with the mass shootings and the increase in violence, it just seems like, we have to simmer down. We have to become a lot more peaceful. We have to keep our hands off our guns and learn how to cooperate. And my understanding, from a lay perspective on this whole issue is sort of what you see on mainstream media and a little bit of real information and maybe some TV shows and stuff like that. I know that when I worked on the CPC, I worked with Kathleen Burke, who was on the governor's task force on sex trafficking. So I became a little bit more of that and working with the ladies at Street Safe. And, I don't think with the schooling and seminars we got from the unoccupied people and the Friends and the Quakers and other groups, you didn't really see much until Deb Haaland became Secretary of the Interior, and then all of a sudden everybody's aware of murdered and missing Indigenous people, and you see some vignettes and some articles on national news, and it's strange. It's finally crept into mainstream media programming. There's two shows that I watch that I probably shouldn't watch. One is called Yellowstone, and that deals with relationships between ranchers and a reservation in Montana. And they do have a great Native American actress who covers teaching colonialism and works with the tribe in trying to track down sex traffickers. And the other show is Big Sky. It's pretty much filmed in Albuquerque, but it's supposed to take place in Montana. But they do tackle a lot of sex trafficking and indigenous issues. But this. What are the figures for New Mexico and the United States as far as? I don't know if you know the figures for missing and exploited women or persons in general, but do you know? And I've been reading that it wasn't until 2016, 2017 when Michelle Lujan Grisham actually set up a missing and murdered task force that we actually knew what these figures are. But do you have any sort of current or semi-current figures on how many Indigenous people and women go missing and are murdered in the United States? And what are they tracking now in New Mexico?
I think nationally, there was a report that was put out, a very important report by the Urban Indian Health Institute, and it was the first report of its kind. It's pretty dense, but they have some really great figures in there. And I think at last, and like I said, this several years ago now, there are over 5,600 cases that were active throughout the United States. In New Mexico, Albuquerque and Gallup, in that report, were the two highest metropolitan areas of missing and murdered cases out of the whole United States. The data that they have in there is mainly focused in the urban areas. What it doesn't account for are the ongoing cases that are happening in tribal lands and tribal territories. And although we understand data is really important because data tells that story, for so long, the responsibility of the federal and the state government, they failed in their responsibility to track those cases. So because of that, it led to a lot of erasure. And some of the pushback we get is it's not as big as a problem as people think it is. And it's only because they're not collecting the data, and nor are they using data that come from community stories. And the stories at what we call the community or the Hogan level always get overshadowed because folks are so dependent on data that we get from federal partners. But coincidentally, when we started our trafficking initiative in the Navajo Nation in 2016, we met with the FBI's office in Gallup, and we asked them, what is your caseload for trafficking? And they said, it's not happening here. We don't have any cases. That's scary when a federal agency that is responsible for the safety and everything in that area says that. When folks know that at laundromats, traffickers target Indigenous women, at single girls, they're also targeting our Indigenous girls, queer, trans relatives online as well in tribal communities. So a lot of the things that we may see in the data currently is kind of what we're working with now, but we also hear those stories on the ground. So I can't provide you an accurate number, but we understand that this has been happening for so many years. It's been happening since the onset of colonization. It's an ongoing crisis. So yeah, that's kind of what the picture looks like here in New Mexico and throughout the United States.
And to add on to that, you know, when we describe the issue and the challenges that we have for really bringing visibility to this and a depth of understanding that is meaningful so that we can actually create positive solutions, I always define the situation we're in as being the result of data wars, right? Like on one hand, we don't have enough data and we're being told that we need to get that data in order to legitimize what's actually happening based on our lived experience. And then once we start getting the data, all these roadblocks get put up depending on who the responsible agency is for having to collect that information or report and respond on that information. And so what's alarming is that here in New Mexico, we have two metropolitan areas with the highest number of cases in the US, but we also know that that is severely underreported. And when you break down, you know, what police precincts actually were able to provide the data in order to get the count that we do have, it's only a tiny minority of them. And they stopped providing that data for many, like, you know, I think because it exposed a lot of different practices of racial injustice happening at that level, you know, like misclassification of people's ethnicity, are not tracking this at all, are even misgendering, you know, different victims are people who have disappeared, or what's most often the experience, not following through at all with legitimizing a missing person report or starting an investigation. And so, you know, we've seen, this is kind of like the second wave of kind of, you know, bringing visibility to epidemic of violence against Indigenous peoples. The first wave was around sexual violence in general. And it wasn't until we started to get the figures that, you know, Indigenous women were 2 to 3 times more likely to experience sexual violence in their lifetime that really started to gain outside attention. But for generations, we've lived with the experience of knowing that there is almost no one in our communities or in our families that was not experiencing some type of sexual violence within their lifetime. And so when people hear about these issues, they want to know what's going on. But, you know, the challenge there for non-Indigenous peoples is that we have to go back to the history of like what has created the conditions for these things. The manufactured economic bondage that our tribal communities are structured under, the legacy of boarding school violence in our communities, and the way that for generations broke up families, disappeared our children, you know, who also were the first cases of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples in our communities. And only now are we even beginning to scratch the surface of what that really did to our nation, to our communities. And so I think that's where it becomes overwhelming to people. And like having to address this issue, we need to reconcile that brutal history and the legacy of colonization that has been both historic but is also ongoing in many ways.
Yeah.
Well, I talked before about the governor's task force, and I guess I read recently that there's a revamp of it and a bunch of newer data coming in. I guess that's called the Women's Task Force, or House Bill 278. That was the original Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force Act, and on May the 5th of 2021, the governor signed Executive Order 2021-013, which establishes the next phase of the task force. Task force is comprised of representatives across the tribal nations, including state legislatures and community partners. Have you guys been working with that task force, and what has been happening so far since it's reconvened and had a serious revamp?
Yeah, the coalition is actually a member of the task force, so we do attend the regular meetings. And I think when it was first implemented at that time, there was a lot of skepticism because we feel like, when task forces are created, it's just another way of, how would you say, if there's a problem, they just create a task force. But what does it do, really? So there's a little bit of skepticism at the very beginning. But what's really great about this task force, especially under the leadership of Secretary Lynn Trujillo, is that they reached out to community. They reached out to the community organizers, the organizations that are engaged in this work. And I know I didn't mention it earlier, but I'm also a task force member with Missing and Murdered Diné Relatives. I'm a co-founder. And we were able to help provide recommendations and bring families to the table. That was the main piece of our advocacy, was families had to be at the table. Organizers had to be at the table. Folks that understand the dynamics of these issues with those lived experiences had to be at the table.
Is there any way that the community and other people in the state can help you? Is there a website that people can go to for the coalition?
Yeah, if folks go to csvanw.org, we do have ways you can support our coalition, and you can also sign up for our newsletters, and also become a member. And contributing members do have a chance to really see what programming is being developed, and they also get a chance to be a part of that co-creation. So we certainly love our members. We're a member-driven organization. We're not a direct service provider, but we do work a lot with community, especially our advocates. I just want to say our advocates are amazing, especially those that are on the front lines working with families in crisis. So yeah, that's who we are.
Great. And Janene, do you have websites or community building groups that people can get involved with?
Absolutely. A lot of the community groups that I work with are very grassroots, so the majority of their web presence is on Facebook. And one of the groups I work with is Diné for Justice. But you can find information on the work that I do generally with Indigenous peoples on www.six-world.com, which is the consultancy that I've co-founded. But there's also a lot of information for the organization that I work for the majority of my time, which is indiancollective.org.
Well, I think we need to obviously tighten up a lot of things. It seems like everything's spread out and your data collection is spread out. I hope the 2010 or whatever the latest census helped you at all. But like I said, for certain issues in Albuquerque and stuff like that with police reform and CYFD, I'm going like, why aren't all these agencies connected? Why isn't Anna Caseman and this mental health provider and the Bernalillo County connected with CYFD? Why aren't they connected with the Real-Time Crime Center? Why isn't Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office connected with the data sharing with APD and stuff like that? And it's a huge area. I mean, it's bigger, almost bigger than 2 New Mexicos, and it's a spread out area. I don't know how you can put out heightened security. I don't know how you can have. I guess you need, better cell phone and burner phones or some kind of communication device and alert devices that everybody could carry around the reservation. It's a huge area, and you see. Meth trailers over here on TV and people abducting people over here. Is there any way, aside from the FBI, federal agencies, local agencies, that you can actually try to pull together and increase security?
Well, I think this is an important question, right? Because it gets us down to better understanding what solutions are necessary to address the root causes. Mm-hmm. And when you take, that's one of the other things that I've seen that's made me skeptical about the different government responses to this issue, is that so much of it is resting on trying to strengthen the legal systems, particularly our prison systems and the jurisdiction and powers and authorities that are around that. But when you work with community and you look at, what are the different aspects of vulnerabilities and the different conditions that are leading to this epidemic, the solutions look much different, much more different. You know, like where we're dealing with complex situations, where we're from communities that are grappling with the legacies of environmental violence on our lands and on our peoples. Like I said before, the economic bondage that our communities are placed under that has been manufactured for the purposes of limiting the definition and exercise of sovereignty for the benefit of exploiting resources, natural resources, or human resources found on Indigenous peoples' lands. And so when you look at the complexity of the situation that we're in, we require solutions that are just as complex. And that doesn't look like more prisons, right? It looks like wraparound services, better health care, better job opportunities, sustainable job opportunities, better education for all of our reservation schools and all of the people that we call our neighbors now. And when you look at what those solutions really entail, they require a different set of priorities from those that are in power to really redirect resources and invest them where the people need them to increase their quality of life, to improve their living conditions, to improve public health outcomes. And when you can invest in that, I think that that's where we'll make the most progress towards eradicating this epidemic from our lands, not only for the benefit of our Indigenous peoples, but for the benefit of all peoples who require these alternative solutions and forms of power.
Well, you know, Native American people deserve all the respect we can give them, but you know, there's been stigmas and stereotypes, and it almost seems like you're a civilization of the past in a way. Do you know what I mean? I mean to the way the media portrays Native Americans, books and things like that. Do you? Apparently, of course, we have to break down these stereotypes, and I see there's a lot more opportunity in Hollywood and the movies for Native Americans, and there's a lot of Native Americans I know that are being cast in movies and different series and shows that are produced right here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I even saw an article of this movie called Prey, which is going to film in the Comanche language. So yes, there's more awareness, there's more activism, there's more people involved with the Native American community. This is almost a question like the International District here in Albuquerque. It's like, how much data, how much resources can we give you, or do you want to be put in a situation where you know your needs. You need to find out what your needs are, how they can be met, how you can build within community and within the reservation for better futures and safety for everybody.
We need people to understand and commit to upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples, period. That's the minimum standard. That's where we can begin to open the door to equitable partnerships and for Indigenous-led solutions to be properly resourced and Indigenous communities to be properly resourced. You know, like one of the things that is complex that needs to be brought up in this discussion is like the Violence Against Women Act and the ways that that act has opened up provisions to allow tribal courts to persecute non-tribal members that commit violence against people enrolled in a reservation or living on a reservation. That was seen to be a groundbreaking win for expanding tribal sovereignty and for creating the conditions by which the non-Native perpetrators were no longer allowed to act with impunity in carrying out violence on reservation lands. However, the tribal court systems and tribal governments weren't properly resourced to actually implement that fully. There are legalities that they have to uphold and services they have to offer in order to ensure that that law is properly implemented on tribal territories. And so when we talk about what needs to be done, all across the board, support for the self-determination of Indigenous peoples, period. And the way that can be done in the minimum way is for people to better understand and read the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to also do their own research. I mean, you know, I get frustrated with, like, the invisibilization of Indigenous peoples in mainstream media, but everyone has access to anti-Google. That's what I call it. Everyone has access to all of these resources. We are the generation and in an era where people have the most access to the majority of information than we ever have had in human history. It is incumbent upon people to take that responsibility upon themselves to do that research for themselves. And Indigenous peoples have done phenomenal jobs for creating the type of apps, programs, websites, TV shows, books, literature, research studies that can help people better inform their understanding about the conditions that we're living in, and to be more aware of our visibility on every homeland in every state. And so I encourage people to do that.
Well, I think across the nation we've seen divisions and racial divisions trying to target different groups, but it's Pride Month. It's like the Pride Rainbow. Trans people, queer people, black people, Native Americans. Everybody has everybody has human rights. Everybody has the right to exist, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we need to help different communities all have the same respect as anybody else. We're almost done. Do you guys want to add anything before we sign off?
Yeah, I think just kind of speaking to the two questions that you had asked earlier, I think uplifting organizations that are doing this work is really important, along with self-education and having access to those resources, is really looking at the community work, such as the Coalition or Pueblo Action Alliance or Missing and Murdered Diné relatives, or even one of the leading organizations that are collecting data from the community level, Sovereign Bodies Institute. And it's really important to know these organizations, because that's really where the solutions are happening. And that's where it should be highlighted. And also just working to understand tribal communities just at a base level. It's really interesting how within the state of New Mexico, a lot of folks really miss the mark in understanding the communities. We're a tribally dense state. There's 23 tribal nations, 19 Pueblos, 2 Apache tribes, and of course, like the Navajo Nation. It's really about stepping up and being true allies to the first folks in these lands, and having that respect and knowledge of the territories that folks are occupying. I think that's also a piece of the education for folks. And I think in terms of also addressing violence is understanding where those root causes are, and how does the system play a role in oppressing these different populations, especially Black and Indigenous people. Where does that come from? You were talking about stereotypes and stigmas earlier, and a lot of it is always surrounded around alcoholism or drug dependency, lack of unemployment. But what folks don't realize is the systems that were designed to inflict that type of oppressive environment. So it's going to take dismantling patriarchy. It's fighting against capitalism. It's even having, for a lot of folks who might not be Native, having that uncomfortable conversation about white supremacy, about privilege, and what does allyship look like, in supporting the First Peoples in these areas. So, and it's a lot of internal reflection too, when educating. So I think one of the solutions to violence within the community is just really at that self-education level and dismantling those systems.
I don't think you could have summed it up any better, and mad respect to you guys. Don't marginalize anybody, don't sneer down on anybody. We all have to work together to create a better world and to save ourselves from the climate crisis that we're in right now. Thank you very much, Jolene and Janene, for coming on the show. And I guess what we're going to do next is well, we're a little behind on Pride Month, but we're celebrating Pride Month all month long. Like I said, the Pride Parade is on right now on Saturday, and right now we're going to show you a YouTube clip that's the best out of about 6 that I've seen about the Stonewall riots and the beginning of Pride and the LGBTQ plus respect and community building.
Imagine this street filled with flames, police, and rioters. This is the Stonewall Inn, and what happened here 50 years ago changed the lives of LGBTQ people forever. You've probably heard of Stonewall. It's a New York bar still open today. It's also a national monument. On June 28, 1969, the police raided Stonewall. Back then, being LGBTQ was illegal pretty much everywhere. You could either be arrested for solicitation of homosexual relations, which is basically a catch-all excuse to put gay people in handcuffs, or you could be arrested if you didn't dress according to your gender assigned at birth. New York was so tough on LGBTQ people, they wouldn't even give gay bars a liquor license. No liquor at gay bars. Gay bars were a sanctuary for our community, literally. Oftentimes the only place that a person could go to be themselves, and without a liquor license, these safe havens couldn't operate legally. The mafia helped on this one. They put up the cash to run gay bars like speakeasies and bribed cops to leave them alone. But it didn't totally work. In 1969, there had been a gay bar crackdown, and this place was just next on their list. Cops stormed the bar with a warrant and lined everybody up against a wall. Then, drag queens and trans women were taken into the bathroom by female officers to check their gender. Yeah, that really happened. Not everyone can agree on what or who exactly started the riot. However, several people credit Stormy DeLarvery, a drag king and self-appointed guardian of lesbians. The people who agree it was Stormy say that she was dragged out in handcuffs and blurted out to the crowd, "Why don't you guys do something?" The fighting started immediately. By that point, word got out to the village that cops had raided Stonewall. Enough was enough, and crowds of people came to Christopher Street to protest the raid. That's when one of the most iconic Stonewall moments of all time occurred. Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman, chucked a shot glass through the bar's window and screamed, "I got my civil rights!" They called it the shot glass heard round the world. Meanwhile, protesters were chucking cobblestone bricks from the streets at the police. As the bricks flew, queer people ran out of Stonewall. And now, ironically, it was the police's turn to find sanctuary inside the gay bar that had been set on fire. The cops escaped the bar and broke up the crowd, but the protests went on for days afterward. A year later, the LGBTQ community honored Stonewall's anniversary with Christopher Street Liberation Day. This spread from New York to Chicago, LA, and San Francisco. And soon, the revolution was in full swing, and Christopher Street's liberation was being celebrated all over the world. A few years later, the tradition became known as Pride. Brenda Howard is believed to have coined the term. She was a bisexual activist and later became known as the mother of Pride. There had been decades of protests and pushback that came before it, but Stonewall's impact was astronomical. It emboldened LGBTQ people to step out of the shadows and publicly, powerfully advocate for our rights. It was a release of the community's collective anger and frustration after being silenced, targeted, and harassed for far too long. And it allowed that anger to be turned into positive action. 50 years later, we've made so much progress, but there is still work to be done. To make the next 50 years even brighter, we have to keep up the fight started by Stonewall's heroic veterans. Share this video if you believe in honoring LGBTQ heroes.
That was a very powerful YouTube video about the origins of LGBTQ pride and the Stonewall riots. And I really want to thank Janene and Jolene for going out of their way for that really important interview. And right now in our studio, we have Tully Alford, who is going to do 2 songs for us. He's going to do Red, White, and Blues and Conflict of Interest. And our music director, Matt John, will be interviewing him afterwards. Take it away, Tully.
Thank you, Tom. First thing I'm going to do is my Red, White, and Blues song. And having grown up in Washington, D.C., I'm a native there from many years ago. And this is a song I wrote, just about the time of the State of the Union address. It's, I call it Red, White, and Blues, but it's kind of my State of the Union. It goes something like this. Tell you a story about this troubled land. Not really sure you'll understand. Falls big business, DC tudes. Just remember that we all get screwed. It's when the shit, it hits the fan. Say goodbye to the old promised land. Though I try to raise the red, white, and blue, the U.S. is in deep doo-doo. Should've gone straight, not left or right. Now we're in for one hell of a fight. We had our chance to change the tide. Now she's gonna be a white knuckle ride. Planes and bombs, they are their cure. Well, just ask me and I ain't so sure. To ask the people, I think they'll say those in DC, they are not okay. Though I try to raise the red, white, and blue, the U.S. is in deep doo-doo. Should've gone straight, not left or right. Now we're in for one hell of a fight. Well, compromise is out the door. Red or blue, they all be whores. It starts in Boston and ends in L.A. Those in D.C., they are in the way. Though I try to raise the red, white, and blue, the U.S. is in deep doo-doo. Should've gone straight, not left or right. Now we're in for one hell of a fight. We're all Americans, we're proud and sure. Need to get back to the way we were, but we elected Trump, and that's bad news. Now we're gonna have to pay them dues. But people don't get it, they don't see the clues. That's why I'm here singing the blues. Though I try to raise the red, white, and blue, the U.S. is in deep doo-doo. Should've gone straight, not left or right. Now we're in for one hell of a fight. Though I try to raise the red, white, and blue, U.S. is in deep doo-doo. Should've gone straight, not left or right. Now we're in for one hell of a fight. We should've gone straight, not left or right. Now we're in for one hell of a fight.
Ladies and gentlemen, and I'm Matt John here for That Saturday Show with Tully Alford. Tully, thanks for playing today.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
You're welcome. You've been doing original music since 2014, and I think I can relate to what got you writing. You were concerned about the things in the political world, and that's where the songs came out. I can relate. I kind of do that myself.
Lots of things going wrong in Washington, D.C., I'll tell you that. Lots of things broken.
Yeah, and you're from D.C. originally. I was
30
wondering,
years, born and bred.
Did you ever do touristy stuff? Well, you're from there, but did you ever tour like the Capitol building?
Done everything but the White House.
Same. I
You
mean,
name
not
it,
same,
I've
but
done
I toured the Capitol when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and nowadays I seem to have learned so much about American politics and history that it doesn't seem so exciting to tour D.C. It seems kind of nerve-wracking and.
I was there before they had all the barriers and the worry about all the terrorist attacks. It was kind of, you had a lot more free flow and access with the politicians. Now it's much more cut off and blocked off. But yeah, much different experience. But I did just about everything you could do there growing up as a kid for 30 years. But family had nothing in politics. My grandfather was the Washington correspondent for the Kansas City Star, and he was there during FDR's term. That's when my family moved there during the Great Depression, my dad's family.
But no one else in our family had anything to do with politics or anything at all. We're just regular folks from Washington, D.C., which there are a lot there. Not everyone lives there for 4 or 8 years.
Definitely. And my dad's from D.C. too, and it's fascinating. I hope to someday do some actual protesting there, which I haven't done.
I've done some.
I imagine
I did a
my
lot.
dad did some excellent protesting, got himself arrested protesting against, I believe it was the Kent State Massacre back in '70. So you've got some stuff coming up. You've played a couple First Fridays at the OT Circus Art Gallery.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that go?
The last couple of months, it was really great. I got some of my friends out there too, and it's been really exciting. Really well received.
Very glad to hear it. And are you doing like protest songs there, among others?
No. I have to be
different.
a little less political in those kind of events. It has to
different
be very-
repertoire.
Yeah, because you don't know who's going to show up for those things.
Yep, I understand
So
that. I
it's-
played at the rail yards in the past,
Yeah.
and kind of like a family-friendly kind of vibe. So, but anyway, you're hoping that we can find you at other First Friday events down at OT Circus on Central by 7th.
Yes, 7th and Central.
7th and Central. Well, that sounds great. And so you've been writing songs since 2014. You've got another original song coming up called Conflict of Interest.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Oh, and I want to also say thanks for when I moved back here last year, started going to open mics. You were one of the really friendly people I met, so to make it so welcoming and all that good stuff.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so
We've had some fun together.
yeah, we have had fun at the
sure
open
more
mics
coming.
and all that stuff. Yeah, so let us welcome Tully Alford with another original song called Conflict of Interest.
This next song I'm gonna do, again, is a little political. It's really bipartisan or nonpartisan, depending on how you want to look at it. It goes against just the whole political system. And my dad, one of the things he used to always tell me when I was growing up is, Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. They're all crooks, is what he said. So it's kind of a song about like that. Conflict today. Conflict of interest, it's headed our way. Conflict today. Conflict of interest, it's here to stay. Conflict of interest, it's here to stay. Republican or Democrat, they're all the same. Getting elected is the name of their game. Goal is to rob you, forget the past. They just rob you and they laugh last. They like to promise. They like to promise, say it's for sure. They like to promise, call it a cure. Whatever they promise, it's out the door. Just don't look back, 'cause they will take more. Conflict today. Conflict of interest, it's headed our way. Conflict today. Conflict of interest, it's here to stay. Conflict of interest, it's here to stay. Getting elected, they're all the same. Getting elected, just looking for fame. Once in D.C., it's a CYA. Yeah, once in D.C., they're here to stay. it don't happen, they like to point. When it don't happen, they stink up the joint. Not much gets done, their way of life. Not much gets done, and we pay the price. Conflict, conflict, conflict today. Who likes conflict? It's headed our way. Conflict, conflict, conflict today. Conflict of interest, it's here to stay. Conflict of interest, it's here to stay. Conflict of interest, it's here to stay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tully, for those great songs. Thank you for that interview, Matt. What you're going to be seeing next is a gentleman at the La Mesa Church gun awareness program that happened last week. I think he's going to be talking about gun control and gun safety and trying to saw an AR-15 or something in half. And right after that, you're going to see our new associate director at the Peace Center, Matt Pettit, interviewing me about where I come from and what I do. And that will be the show. And y'all have a very nice weekend. Enjoy your Pride. Enjoy Pride Month. Get out there, have fun, make it happen. We'll see you next week on that Saturday show.
My name is Garrett Veneklassen, born and raised in Santa Fe, and now currently live in Taos, New Mexico. I have it's actually a Chinese version of an AK-47. It's a tactical assault weapon. I've owned it for about 20 years, and that thing has been sitting in my gun safe for 20 years, burning a hole in my conscience. And every time I open the gun safe, I look at that thing, and it doesn't make me feel good. And so cutting it up today was the right thing to do. It is a symbol of me standing in solidarity with the thousands of Americans who have died senselessly due to gun violence. And I think, again, silence and non-action from the gun-owning community like me is being complicit in the bloodshed. And so I really want to appeal to the gun owners out there to turn away from the NRA and to stop listening to their propaganda and to start being proactive in supporting common sense gun reform. I think this Robb Elementary School incident, 19 babies, little kids killed, and 2 teachers. I am a father, and I can't imagine something like this happening to my daughter or my family. And I think that this was the right moment to do this and to take a stand and to make a statement. And when you think of the lives that have been taken by these weapons of war, to take one out of circulation means that a life probably won't be taken with that gun. That gun will not get circulated and purchased by someone who shouldn't purchase it and use it in a way that it shouldn't be used. And for me as a gun owner, that's a really good feeling. If I feel like I'm complicit in the bloodshed as a gun owner who isn't speaking up, I would argue to you as a gun owner, you should consider the same thing. I am complicit to the bloodshed until we join the conversation.
Until the next time, it's time to say goodbye. When you out here in the streets, keep it real, 505. We love everybody, we just want to let you know. Thanks for tuning in to that Saturday show.